Tonight, we have 7 stories, all detailing cryptids, creatures, and other things that lurk in the night, from park rangers to people just trying to get a good night's sleep. The bizarre and strange can happen at any time. A huge thank you to all of tonight's writers. Remember to send in your story if you'd like to have it featured. You can either submit it at my subreddit, r/slumberreads, or my email you can find in the description. Be sure to drop a like if you enjoy. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. This winter was strange. We saw snow in September, rain in November, and nothing else. The local forestry service was afraid the sudden dryness could lead to winter fires, so when they started asking for volunteers, I practically lunged for the opportunity. I guess I needed a break from reality. Getting lost in the Sierra wilderness was the perfect outlet I needed. My birthday came and went. A few weeks later, Valentine's Day did. No one noticed I was gone. Or no one cared, really. I was getting fairly compensated for 4 months of this, so I didn't care. Once a week, a ranger would come up and deliver supplies, and that was the extent of human contact I had. So today, when I woke up to my phone ringing, I was pretty shocked. I picked up without checking who it was to find my pleasant surprise curdle to anger and disappointment when I heard the voice of my ex, Liza, asking, "Hey, it's been a while since anyone's heard from you, John. Are you okay?" My solitude had made my normal wit a bit rusty, as I struggled to formulate a response for a moment. "I'm sure you'd really care to know, Liza," I snapped icily. She took a moment to let my insult seep in and replied meekly, "John, I'm sorry for what happened. Really, I made a mistake." Liza was never a meek person. Even in the most intimate of moments, she was always bold and trying to take the lead. Her sudden complacent attitude only pissed me off. Yeah, I'm sure after hearing my diagnosis, you maxing out my credit cards, spending 5K of my savings, and fucking dozen people I know of, was a mistake. She quietly interjected, "John, I was really pissed now and kept going. No, don't fucking John me. I charged you to the fullest extent I could. Why aren't you still in jail? You know what? I have a better question. What in God's name gave you the slightest breeze of an inclination I would ever want to hear from you again, much less speak to you?" She didn't have a response to that, bold or otherwise. After a few moments of silence, I hung up and turned my phone off. She had ruined enough days for me. I wasn't going to let her have this one. I decided after breakfast that I was going to go for a hike to calm down and forget about life for a little bit. I decided to head east for a few miles, towards Nevada. As I walked, I took in the chilly mountain air and gawked at the beautiful pines above me. The peace and serenity of nature was ruined for me when I saw a giant cloud a few miles away. The weather for today was predicted as clear, and we're in a drought. I ran back towards the fire watch tower to call it in. As I turned, I saw a bank of fog rolling towards me. I felt uneasy walking into it, but the weather justified getting back. As I walked into the fog, everything acquired a muted, gray quality. All the hairs on my body stood straight up, and I felt like I was being watched. I stopped and listened for some time, but there was no noise. Despite the lack of sensory evidence, I still felt I should run back, and I only had a matter of time before the mist aggravated my lungs as well. Regardless, I walked on, heading towards the tower and regretting not bringing my rifle. After some time of walking, I saw a fire. Eyeing it warily, I walked towards it. Despite the fact it had been midday when I started out, a dark twilight had set in on the land. As I came to the fire, I saw a man sitting on a log. Aside from a magnificent beard and the hat he wore, I wouldn't have even been able to discern anything about him. After a few moments of me passively observing him, the man spoke with a deep, rumbling voice. "Have a seat, John." I gingerly had a seat on a log across from him and asked, "How do you know my name?" The man, still staring deeply into the fire, responded, "I know a lot of things about a lot of people. Things that have happened, things that are happening, and things that will happen." I stewed on his words, but almost instantly replied, "Bullshit." Without looking up, the man chuckled and said lightheartedly, "I know Elizabeth, Lamberley stole over $5,000 from you, fucked 13 people, and tried to accuse you of the unthinkable. I know that just 2 weeks beforehand, you were diagnosed with lung cancer. I know that you hid it, but she still found out. And I know you came here because the cancer won't stop. You've come here to die, John. Under normal circumstances, I would attack someone for saying something like that, for knowing something like that. Instead, I just sat on the log, staring at the fire, feeling very tired. After a minute, I said quietly, "You said it better than I could." We sat silently for a moment as the forest grew darker. After a while, the man said, "You should get along now, lest some souls come and attack you." I nodded and wordlessly got up and walked away. After the light of the fire had receded behind me, I began to realize the uncanny darkness that enveloped me. It was ever increasing, to the point where I couldn't even see my hand. I began to slow my steps and listen in. The forest was dangerous at night, and the last thing I needed was to be surprised without a gun. After some time of carrying on due west, I heard what sounded like a person trampling through the underbrush. I ducked behind a tree and listened as a woman called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" She was approaching my location rapidly, but as she did, I heard what sounded like desperate whispers and muted screams. The woman's fear was audible as it got closer. I could only hear the whispers, but I saw a sort of shade, a figure even blacker than the blinding pitch I found myself in. The figure stopped where I had last heard the woman, and I saw it lean down and pick something up. The woman's screams were ear-piercing as the figure bobbed and moved until with a final, struggling gurgle she stopped. I held my breath as the horror of what I just witnessed dawned upon me. The figure floated about, as if hungry, then it floated away, much to my relief. After that, silently and as quickly as I could, I went back to the tower. I was nearly there when I started to hear the whispering again. I tried to duck behind a tree for cover, as I had before, but as I walked to a tree, I stepped on a branch. A crack as loud as a gunshot rang out in the unnatural darkness, and the whispers seemed to grow more intense and more loud, with no regard for whatever may have been out, aside from the whispering figure. My desperate tearing through the brush ended when I tripped over a rock and fell in an upturned rut. I grimaced as the wave of pain from the stab wound washed over me. As I raised myself from it, after identifying it wouldn't kill me, I heard the whispers in full volume. I looked up from my work to see the figure coming at me slowly, as if it received joy watching me squirm and suffer. Then it began to bend down, preparing to do to me whatever had happened to its last victim, slowly and deliberately. My left hand scrambled desperately until I found a rock. With a shout, I swung the rock into where a head should have been. An unearthly screech emanated from it as it fell over, stunned. A pain-stricken cry rang from me as I tore myself from the branch. The blood flowed freely from me as I ran and saw that the lights in the tower were still on. With my vision flickering and my strength flagging, I climbed the stairs. My breath came in ragged heaves as I heard the thing scream again. It must have seen me. As I flung open the door, I saw just how much blood was flowing from my wound. I ignored it and scrambled to find my rifle. I saw the creature bashing at the door. I only had time to load one 30-06 shell into the powerful gun. As I raised the barrel, I grimly thought, better to die here than some hospital bed. Then the door caved, and with a war cry to awaken gods, I aimed and fired. After that, all was black. I awoke to see the tower out the back window of an ambulance. There were 2 police cars at the base. I looked to my left and saw a ranger. What happened? I croaked out. We found you half dead from blood loss after you failed to radio in for 3 days. We found a woman's bones in the area too, picked clean and bleached. I really ought to ask you what happened, John. The rest of the ride was in silence. I've only been at the hospital for a few hours now, but I can see a bank of dark fog rolling in, and I can't help but feel like I can faintly hear whispering, just at the back of my mind. Let me start by saying that I actually quite like my job. Most people would look at me in shock if I told them that. I work at a stereotypical office job. Small cubicles, a boss everyone secretly hates, and an overworked printer, and coffee machine. But I didn't mind it. I had to eat somehow, so what harm was it really? There was one certain factor that I didn't like though, the desk I worked at. I worked in a small cubicle, same as any other standard employee office space, among the many floors of the company building, yet something was off about it. Looking at it, there didn't seem to be any distinct feature that would cause a feeling of uncertainty or unease, just a cluttered mess of papers with a monitor and computer, decorated by a single picture of my immediate family. It sounds even more stereotypical as I describe it, but bear with me. I tried to pass it off as just the jitters of a new job, but it became worse than that. Whenever I first sat down to work in the morning, a huge wave of unease sat with me. The unease one would feel walking home alone in the dead hours of the night. The same unease of being followed, of being watched. The worst part was that I actually did feel like I was being watched. I would have the sudden urge to look around the office, paranoid for no good reason. The strongest urge was the one to look straight up, like someone a floor above made a hole and was peering down towards me. I hated the thought of it. Thankfully, nothing bad trailed this sense of unease I held, and every time I got up to get a drink or to talk with a coworker, all the feelings I had vanished, right into thin air, as if I'd never felt on edge to begin with. I attempted to abuse this, but I couldn't stand the odd looks I got from the employees around me as I hunched over my desk trying to productively work. I even switched chairs with a coworker whose cubicle was next to mine, doing so when he was away from his desk. Still that forsaken anxiety I always felt. For a week, I worked like this, burying the thought of returning well on my days off, almost in fear when I sat down at my desk, completely relieved whenever I had an excuse to step away from it. The job I once somewhat enjoyed became a dreadful experience. I'd had enough on the 8th day. It got worse that day. The unease was growing, and my heart was beating faster whenever I sat down to work. I talked to my supervisor about switching desks or even floors, anything to seize my current routine. I told him I was willing since our floor was the closest to the ground floor, offering relief for anyone who dreaded the thought of a long elevator ride, or for whatever other obscure reason. The next day, my supervisor came to me with an offer. This older woman, a few floors above us, was willing to move, with no specific reason as to why. I accepted without hesitating, hoping my unease would finally end. And it did. As I began to unpack my papers and photo, I sat down in the new chair, nervous as to what I'd feel. Resting my elbows on the arms of the new chair and leaning forward, I prepared myself. Nothing. I felt nothing. Finally, it was all gone. All those dreadful days of fear and anxiety were gone. Happiness would take their place. Working felt normal again, and as a result, my days were normal. No more fearing my workspace. I was finally at peace. 9 days had passed since I'd switched. I'd nearly forgotten about it by then. On the 3rd day, I peeked onto my previous floor to see how the older woman was doing. I spotted her at her new cubicle. She looked uncomfortable, scared. By her face and shaky movement, she seemed much more on edge than I felt. Of course, I felt bad that I just pinned some cursed desk on this woman, but I only hope she didn't request to return to her original workspace. The 10th day was frightening, more than any day I spent at the cubicle. I'd overslept that day, and I was rushing through my morning routine, praying I would make it to the office in time. When I arrived at the building, panting because of the run from my car, I stopped. The entire building seemed to be evacuated, with all the staff standing around outside, asking questions among themselves. There were police cars and an ambulance parked just in front of the lobby, the lights atop them flashing red and blue. Confused, I asked around, trying to discover the source of the problem. Some janitor I'd never seen before filled me in. A lady had been killed on one of the lower floors. Her shoes, purse, a pool of blood on the cubicle, and blood dripping from the ceiling above it were the only clues to her death. One night, not too long ago, my dad and I went for a night hike in a nearby park. The park is only a few blocks away from my house, and I've grown up walking the trails and swimming in the twin rivers that run through it. The park itself has 9 miles of hiking trails and is located at the edge of town, with nothing but more woods and a highway on the other side of it. We decided to take my dog, Maggie, on this trip, even though she's awful on a leash. She's a German short-haired pointer, so she has tons of energy and couldn't wait to get to the park where she knew she could run around. We left at around 8 p.m. and while it wasn't super dark, I still brought along a headlamp. My dad brought one too, but didn't use it right away because it wasn't dark enough. I turned mine on once we hit the actual trails though. I'm not overly fond of walking at night without some sort of light. When we got to the park, my dad remarked on the lack of people. Sure, it was late, but the park was usually a busy place, even in the late evening. Of course, it might have been due to quarantine restrictions, but I had been there a few times since stay-at-home orders were issued, and there was still a steady flow of people. But it was nice since we didn't have to worry about getting too close to anyone, and Maggie could run around without complaint. The trail we chose was a snowmobile trail in the winter, so it was wide and pretty flat. I hadn't gone on a hike in a while, or hung out with my dad in a while, so it was nice to be with him while enjoying some outdoor time. My dog was happy with the arrangement too. She was running all over the place, disappearing into the brush, only to burst out and run around us. It was a little unnerving to see my dog run toward me out of the dark though. Her eyes seemed to almost glow from reflecting the light from my headlamp, and since she's pretty dark colored, they were all I could see until she got really close. There's a trail I've dubbed the Narnia Trail, because I think it looks pretty, and it's tucked away so most people don't use it. It's almost like my own little trail. Well, it was at first. I'd quickly discovered that it runs alongside a large clearing at one point. The clearing is really just an open area shaded with huge pine trees. I had thought it might be a cool place to hang out until I realized that other people had already been doing that. It's usually only a burnt out fire area, alcohol bottles, and remnants of tents or sleeping bags. Probably nothing more than some teenagers getting high and drunk out in the middle of the woods, right? But the place has always given me a bad feeling, like I shouldn't be there. It was for this reason that I purposely had me and my dad avoid the Narnia Trail on our night hike, passing by it quickly. About halfway through our hike, and only a little way past the Narnia Trail, my dog took off. At first, my dad and I thought nothing of it. She usually will go out of sight while running through the brush and trees, but we can usually still hear her. This time though, it was silent. My dad and I stopped and looked at each other for a moment before calling out for Maggie. Nothing. Not a sound. I was getting a little panicked, and I tried not to totally freak out as I stepped into the tree line, calling her name more forcefully. As soon as I stepped off the path, my headlamp went out, and I could hear Maggie yipping and yelping somewhere ahead of me. My dad was still on the trail, but when I looked back at him, I couldn't hear him. I saw his mouth moving, but I heard no sound. My dog was still barking and yelping in the distance, and it was unlike anything I had heard from her before. I seriously thought she was being killed, either by an animal or by someone. I immediately thought of the Narnia Trail and who could have been hanging out in the creepy clearing. I looked back at my dad and gestured at him to come off the trail. I was fiddling with my headlamp and he took his out, handing it to me as he tried to fix mine. His headlamp worked, but mine wouldn't come on. I put the working headlamp on and rushed my way past brush and low-hanging branches toward the sound of my dog, who sounded really hurt or scared. My dad heard her now too, and I could see the panic on his face. It really sounded like she was in trouble. It took a few minutes of frantic running through the woods that both my dad and I realized. 1, it was probably not the best idea to go after something that is capable of killing our dog. 2, we were straying farther and farther from the main trail. And 3, my headlamp was dimming. We stopped and caught our breath, looking at each other, sweating and fearful. My dog had stopped making noise, and I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. My dog was probably dead. I started crying and my dad just stood there frozen. We were like that for a few minutes before my dad pulled on my arm and tried to get me to move back toward the main trail. I refused. I wanted to go find my dog's body at the very least. I wanted to say goodbye. My dad wouldn't let me. He pulled me through the trees in the direction he thought the main trail was. I was fighting with him the whole time, crying and yelling at him. Again, not the best move when there is something deadly lurking in the woods. We continued for about 10 minutes before my dad stopped in confusion. I looked around and my heart almost stopped. We were in the middle of the Narnia Trail clearing. There was a smoldering fire and trash thrown around. I got the feeling that something or someone was watching us, and I started to panic, telling my dad we had to leave right now. He didn't really understand why, but he agreed with me. I took him toward the Narnia Trail, adrenaline pumping through me, and tears streaming down my face. I was terrified. I found the part of the Narnia trail that would lead back to the original trail and led my dad down it. We eventually made it back to the main trail and started for home. I was shaking. I had a very distinct feeling that something is very wrong, and I just wanted to get home. Even if I was leaving my dog behind, there was nothing we could do now. We had made it about 10 minutes back toward the main park when we heard something running through the woods toward us. I screamed and ran, my dad following. I thought I was going to die, that the animal or person or whatever that had probably killed my dog had found us. I don't think I've ever run as fast as I did then, but the thing caught up to us pretty easily. It shot out from the tree line in front of us and stopped. I caught it in my headlamp's beam and I nearly fell over. It was my dog. She was panting hard, but it was her, alive and well. I ran to her and hugged her, crying. My dad was crying too. He put her back on the leash and we continued back toward home. The entire time I kept looking behind us, certain that something was going to pop out and kill us, but nothing ever did. It was when we got home, and I had showered and relaxed enough that I realized my dog had come from the opposite direction from where she supposedly was attacked. She didn't even come from the side of the woods that the Narnia trail was on. She came running up from the river side of the trail and from farther up the trail than us. It could have been that she'd run around enough to end up there, but it didn't sit well with me. Neither did suddenly turning up in the creepy clearing. My dog is fine. She has no injuries and seemingly acts the same, but these past few days I've been wondering, what if she's not my dog at all? Last year, my friend Christian helped me get a job for a company that helps rangers find people lost in the woods. People get lost in this area surprisingly frequently, and no one really knows why. On my first day on the job, I was called in to help find a little girl. As we were driving to the area, Christian told me, "Now there's a lot of things that are weird in these woods, things that are out of place. You'll see what I mean. Do not, under any circumstances, go near them." "Like what?" I asked. "I really don't like talking about it. I'm letting you guys a warning. If you see something out of place, do not go near it." I've never really been into the woods before this job. Hell, I'm only doing it for the money. I thought Christian was trying to scare me, just because the woods are a perfect setting for something scary to happen. When we arrived, there were around 20 people looking for this little girl. According to her parents, she vanished without a trace. The parents had no idea where she could have possibly went to. They were camping, and they woke up to her tent wide open. We decided to split each other to smaller groups that had 5 or 6 people. The group I was in decided to search the river that was about a mile away. During the walk there, I decided to ask my group if they've seen anything out of place. Like Christian mentioned before, everyone looked at me with a mix of annoyed and nervousness. "You haven't seen anything out of place yet?" said Jason, a police officer. "No, this is my first time doing this," I said, hoping someone was going to share a story and what they witnessed. "Nobody likes talking about the things out here, because they can be quite scarring," Jason said with a stern tone. Stupidly, I asked Jason, "Care to share something that scared you to me?" "No, let's just focus on finding this little girl." Jason obviously was annoyed. I nodded my head, and for the rest of the walk, we called for the little girl's name. "Do we know anything else about Allison?" I asked my group. Everyone nodded their head no, except for Jason. She's 10 years old, and her parents said it wasn't like her to just wander away. When I was back at the spot where everyone first met, I was told by the parents that Allison was wearing a white shirt and yellow pants. I figured a girl with her description would stick out, but wherever she was not anywhere obvious so far. We stopped by the river, looking at our surroundings. We discussed where to go next. We agreed to go across the bridge that was above the river. When we got to the middle of the bridge, we all heard an ear-piercing scream. This caused 3 of us to go on one side of the bridge, while the others went back the way they came. "Where are y'all going?" I asked. "I hear the screams this way," one of the members said. Everyone went in a different direction. I wasn't expecting to be alone in this, but I'm getting paid to find this little girl, so I went where I thought I heard the scream. I eventually saw something that completely stunned me. Facing me was a staircase. It was leaning upward. The stairs looked like they came from a house. The stairs even had white carpet on them. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I took my glasses off, rubbed my eyes, and put them back on. The stairs were still there, but now, every other stair was yellow. I thought to myself, why is it the same colors as Allison was last seen wearing? Hell, why is there stairs in the woods to begin with? I still thought this thing wasn't real, so I picked up a rock and threw it towards the stairs. This was not a good idea. After I threw the rock, it ricocheted back and hit my leg. This caused me to fall over. My leg felt like it almost broke. I thought of what Christian said. Don't go near it. I had a feeling someone or something knew where the little girl was. I went towards the stairs. I said out loud, "Where's Allison?" I wasn't sure why I was expecting a set of stairs in the middle of the woods to communicate with me, but I stared at the stairs, being no more than a few inches away from them. A voice in my head said, "Run." I must have stared at the stairs for about 40 minutes. I snapped out of it when I got a text from Christian. There happened to be a cell tower nearby where I got a little bit of signal.
"Where are you? Why didn't your group stick together?"
We all heard a scream from different directions. Apparently, some of the members decided to head back to where we originally met. Expecting Christian not to believe me, I told him about the stairs in the woods. "Dude, you probably think I'm crazy, but there's a set of stairs right in front of me."
"Please tell me you didn't touch them. Bro, you need to get back here now."
Christian said. "Okay, I'm heading back." I looked in front of me. The stairs are still there. I started to think that my group members saw a set of stairs similar to mine, but instead of turning back, they must have went up them or touched them in some sort of way, and something bad happened to them. On my way back, I asked Christian what happens if someone touches the stairs. He responded with, "Usually, the lost person is either discovered mutilated or never seen again. Usually someone claims they thought it would be funny to climb the stairs, but I can't help to think that touching the stairs and the chance of someone being found have some sort of correlation." I asked if he wanted to see the stairs, and Christian replied, "They're probably already gone." I was no more than a few feet away from the stairs, but when I turned around, they were gone. "How did you know they were gone?" I asked. Christian said, "I think they disappear when the fate of the lost person is decided by whatever being, spirit, force, whatever you want to call it." Eventually I made it back to where we were originally. Everyone was there except for Jason. It was unnervingly quiet for another hour as we waited for him to come back. The sun was setting, but as it was setting, we saw Jason off in the distance. Next to him was Allison. She was still wearing the same clothes that she was described to be wearing. She had a few bruises, but she said that she was hungry. Her parents asked her why she left, and she said, "I'm not even sure when or how I got there. It seemed like I just teleported to there." Jason found her near the river sitting on a tree. Allison asked Jason if he heard the scream, and Jason said, "That wasn't your scream?" "No. I hope whoever it was is okay." As Jason was heading to leave, he told me in a quiet tone that the scream wasn't hers, and that gave me chills. Jason said that we might have imagined it, but how do 7 different people hear something at the same time? I think Jason was either mortified or tired, or a mixture of both, because he quickly went to his police car and drove off before I was able to respond. One question still remains. Whose scream did we hear in the woods? Children are known to have fairly wild imaginations. During bedtime, it's common for little kids to ask their parents to check for monsters before going to bed. Maybe I just had a very active and vivid imagination as a child, but what I saw when bedtime came around seemed much too real, and I'll never forget about it. My mother, who took care of me alone and worked a night shift, would drop me off at my aunt's house before work every night. I had my own room, and I would be tucked into bed by 10:30 on the dot. I always felt strange being in that room at night, and I'd have nightmares regularly, but the nightmares aren't what this post is about. Eventually I would begin waking up from deep sleeps to knocking on the window above my bed. I shrugged it off for a while until the light knocking turned into banging and scratching. One night, I worked up the courage to look out the window when the banging became too much to listen to. I got up from under the covers and moved the blinds with the tips of my fingers. That's when I first saw it. The window watcher. A humanoid figure with a large head, dead eyes, gray skin, and an ear-to-ear smile with rotten, sharp teeth. It was tall, so much so that it appeared to have to bend over to get a clear glimpse into my window. I screamed and hid under the covers. My aunt and uncle ran into the room in response to my screams as I told them about the monster outside the window. They assured me that there were no such thing as monsters. As they raised the blinds to show me that there was nothing in the window, they tucked me back into bed and turned out the lights. I didn't sleep that night. My encounters with the window watcher didn't end there. The creature began to visit me every night, tapping on the window and whispering terrible things to me through the glass. This continued until one night, I woke up to a cold breeze hitting my face. I opened my eyes to see the window wide open, and to my right, in the corner next to my bed, it stood, hunched over in the shadow staring at me with a sinister grin. The creature stood at least 9 feet tall, with a frame of skin and bones and arms long enough to reach the floor. I was paralyzed in fear, and before I could even think about opening my mouth to scream, it crawled towards me and placed its hand over my mouth. It raised up its other hand and placed a finger on its cracked, pale lips. It spoke. "If you scream, I'll tear out your jaw." Its sharp, raspy voice echoed in my head as tears rolled down my face. It stood back up and crawled out the window. I refused to sleep in my bed that night and slept with my aunt and uncle. The window watcher only got more active. I began noticing its long, slender silhouette stumble around outside my view of the bedroom door. Sometimes it would stand just outside the doorway, hunched over, peeking in with its dead, bright yellow eyes, grinning at me with a finger placed on its lips in a hushed motion. Sometimes it would hide in the closet, breathing heavily as it stared at me throughout the night. I was never alone in that room. I could always feel its eyes on me. I began getting sleep deprived, being too scared to sleep at night. As a way to help me feel safe, my aunt let her dog named Teddy, a Yorkshire Terrier, sleep in bed with me. I began feeling more safe. Teddy would growl whenever the window watcher came near, until eventually the window watcher stopped coming around. For a few weeks I was at ease, until one night, Teddy stayed outside for the night instead of sleeping in bed with me. That night the tapping on the window started up again. As morning rolled around, my uncle walked outside to call Teddy inside, only to find him ripped in half and mutilated. His insides were spread around the lawn. We buried Teddy as my aunt and uncle summed it up as an animal attack. That night I awoke to the window watcher at my bedside. It began to chuckle in my ear as it whispered that Teddy is no longer around to keep me safe. It wrapped its hands around my head as it leaned in to whisper in my ear, "You'll never be safe from me. I'll always be right there watching you during the night, feeding off your fear." Its cold breath sent shivers down my spine as it stood up to crawl out the window and disappear into the night. I'm now 17 years old. I've far outgrown my fear of monsters and the dark, though I still refuse to spend the night at my aunt's. My memories of the window watcher still haunt me, and I get an uneasy feeling walking into my old bedroom. I now live with my mom, far away from my aunt's house. Strangely enough, I've begun hearing knocking on my bedroom window. God save me if the window watcher has found me again. I was only 12 years old when I first discovered it. My family and I had a very fun, and as my dad liked to call it, healthy activity. Every other weekend we went for a hike in the mountains that surrounded our town. Due to living in a very mountainous area, hiking was a very popular form of recreation for the townsfolk. There were dozens upon dozens of trails to choose from, so my parents liked to choose a different one every time we ventured out. Our latest choice, however, proved to be our last as a family. I was the middle child with a younger brother and an older sister. My parents liked to put us in charge of picking the trail. We'd have our little adventure on, and it was my little brother's turn. "All right, little man," my father shouted to my brother from the computer screen. "Here are your two choices, Rattlesnake Gulch Trail or Neff's Canyon Trail." My brother looked up at him from his Game Boy. Well, I don't want to get us all killed by rattlesnakes, so Snuff's Canyon, I guess," he remarked while immediately resuming his game. Dad let out a humorous scoff. "It's Neff's Canyon, buddy," he said while motioning to my mom to see the pictures. After packing our supplies and being yelled at only 6 times by my sister for packing things incorrectly, we made our way out. We had made it roughly halfway through the trail into a more densely wooded area, which made visibility ahead a little more difficult. Many of the overgrown trees had rooted themselves into the trail, as I remembered tripping over several roots and scraping my forehead against many of the overgrown branches. It was here that I asked my father if we could take a quick restroom break. Without a word, he nodded while taking a swig from his water bottle. I walked off the trail, brushing through the dense foliage. I wanted to get enough distance to make sure my sister couldn't see me pee. Weird thought, I know, but as a child, I was very sensitive to that kind of thing. As I finished up, I began turning to walk back to my family. I noticed something strange through the dense trees. One tree among the many stood out. It was much darker in color and seemed a lot more dried out and unhealthy. My curiosity got the best of me, and I walked over to inspect this poor tree. As I arrived at the tree, scratch marks covered the entirety of it. It was dry with very few branches and no leaves. The dark color was almost disturbing, like something you would see on the set of a horror film. It was dead. Bummer, I said to myself as I began walking back to my family. As I turned to leave, I caught a quick glimpse of something no one could prepare for. On the side of the tree, almost towards the top, I could see a hole in the bark. Assuming it may be some kind of animal nest, I curiously walked around to look in. A frown came across my face as I looked into the tree. It was hollowed out much more than I first realized, and was full of bones. Dozens and dozens of bones, but there were many. I wasn't afraid at first. The first thought that entered my mind was that these were animal bones. Maybe some sick kids killed animals for fun, or maybe this was the work of a bear. Damn, I exclaimed, as the thought of being in a bear's territory startled me. I began to turn to walk away when something caught my eye. Inside the pile of bones, I could see a more smooth surface among the pile. My eyes squinted as I looked closer. My better judgment was not in play as I walked closer. My curiosity got the best of me. I don't know why I did what I did, but I reached my hand in to touch it. It wasn't a flat surface. It was curved. My eyes lit up as I realized what this might be. I felt a fright I had never experienced before as I dug my hand into the pile of bones to pull out what I had originally feared this could be. My fears were correct. Slowly, from the pile of dried bones, a human skull began to appear in my hand. I stood in fright, staring at a dead human skull. "Dad, help!" I yelled, continuing to stare at what I was holding. I heard my dad in the distance through the trees, but couldn't understand what he said. "Dad, come here now!" I tried yelling with all I had. I dropped the skull back into the pile of bones and slowly backed away. My dad broke through the thick foliage, revealing himself. "What's up, buddy?" he said with a smirk. I said nothing. I simply pointed to the tree, not letting my eyes off of it. I could see the look of confusion on my dad's face, even from the corner of my eye. He walked towards the tree with an almost sarcastic look on his face at this point. That look faded away fast as he peered into the hollowed out tree. "Holy shit," my dad began. "You guys, let's go." My mom yelled from the other side of the brush. Slowly, my dad turned to look at me. I'll never forget that moment as my dad and I just stared at each other in shock. A police investigation was done. All 147 bones in the tree were human. A total of 12 separate people reported to be housed in that tree, with mainly the larger bones and skulls being kept. This appeared to be the works of a serial killer. Through DNA testing, many unsolved disappearances were answered. Someone was preying on hikers on that trail. The tree was destroyed by the local authorities. I retold my story over and over again to several detectives. The murders remained unsolved. Until now. 10 years later, I am now an adult and living on my own. While traumatizing as a child, the day of my discovery has been growing further and further from my mind. I purchased a house with my wife closer to downtown. It might be a little bit psychological from that day, but a more urban living style was what offered me safety. "That one," my wife yelled from our computer desk in an almost familiar scenario. I walked over to the computer to gaze at the screen. It was our first anniversary and we wanted to do something special. My wife had picked a cabin out for us to spend the weekend in, and was grinning in excitement as I browsed the photo gallery. It was a beautiful cabin by the lake, and the price was right. "Book it," I said with a smile. She did just that, and for the rest of the week, conversation filled the house with our excitement for the upcoming weekend. The pictures did it no justice. As we arrived at our cabin, a mist hovered over the bank of the lake as dawn ended. We made sure to make it up there early to not waste a moment of our time there. An almost primal fear came over me, as I wasn't prepared for what my wife said later that morning. "Let's go for a hike today," she said, as she cooked our morning eggs. I looked at her with eyes wide open. She looked at me as if she knew what my reaction would be before even asking the question. "I'm sorry. I knew that would be a tough question, but I think it might be good for you," she said confidently. I comically replied, attempting to cover up my nervousness. "I know what happened to you when you were little," she said, raising an eyebrow at me. "But I think this is a chance for you to come to terms. What happened was miles away from here, and a decade ago. I'm betting a nice, safe hike will bring you some closure." Halfway through our breakfast, I finally relented. "Okay," I sternly said, "but if you turn out to be the murderer, I want a divorce." We smiled at each other as we finished our breakfast. A couple hours later, we were packed and ready to go for our hike. I'm happy to report the hike was largely uneventful. It was relaxing, and we put in a lot of quality time in the few hours we were gone. No other human was in sight during the trail, which gave us a sense that this was our adventure together. It was great, until something caught my eye. As we walked back down the trail to end our adventure, a familiar sight hit my eyes. I pulled a classic double take as I spotted it in the distance. A dark, dead-looking tree peered back at me through the forest. We didn't stop our descent to the foot of the mountain, as I kept my eyes trained on it. As we approached the entrance to the trail, I shrugged my sighting off as my mind getting to me. After all, dead trees aren't exactly uncommon. I laid in my bed that night, staring at the ceiling. My wife was fast asleep in exhaustion from today's hike. My mind was reeling with the thought of what I had seen. This couldn't happen again, could it? Could this serial killer be striking again, preying on hikers? My curiosity got the best of me, yet again. I slowly slid out of bed to not wake up my wife. I quietly got dressed to head out, and finally put this fear to rest. I let out a heavy exhale as I stared at the entrance to the trail. With flashlight in hand, I began walking. Every sound from the forest was accompanied by a startled whip of my flashlight. I placed my hand securely on the handle of the knife. I made sure to attach to my belt. The darkness through the forest was eerily silent as I flung my flashlight left and right in confusion. The nighttime atmosphere was throwing me off, with everything looking different. I pulled out my phone to load up a map of the trail. This was not necessary after all. As I placed my flashlight under my arm to retrieve my phone, I saw it. A dark hunk of tree was right in the middle of the light, almost as if it was beckoning me towards it. I stared at it for several seconds. My frame straightened up as I let out another large exhale. It was time to put my fears to rest. I began walking towards the tree. I was stopped in my tracks as I heard tree branches cracking in the thick forest, just to the right of the tree. I ducked in cover while attempting to block the light from my flashlight with my palm. I was able to hit the off switch as I cowered between two large bushes. More limbs cracked as audible footsteps began echoing from the forest. Someone, or something, was coming. The forest around me was lit up in a haze of gray from the moonlight. I looked back at the trail, contemplating making a run for it. If whatever this was that was breaking through the forest was a bear or mountain lion, I wouldn't make it very far if it heard me, though. I stood my ground. The cracks of the branches became louder as I saw the trees begin to separate. Clunk. Something fell to the ground from the trees. I couldn't tell what it was, but it landed directly at the base of the blackened tree. A low groan was heard from the thick branches it just fell from, followed by a raspy growl. I ducked down further into the bushes, realizing I was having an animal encounter and had to keep out of sight as to not be attacked. I'm not sure if the term animal is correct for the actual encounter I had next. Something came to retrieve its prize. The dense leaves began to part again. A large, claw-like hand came from the trees, grabbing what was dropped on the ground. A form started to emerge. Its giant body must have been 15 feet tall. Its limbs were stretched unimaginably long. The body of this creature was covered in hair while its arms and legs were completely hairless. Talon-like claws stretched from its bony arms as it lifted up its prize. The form of a human began to appear as it was lifted by the ankle. I covered my mouth almost instinctively, trying desperately not to make a noise in the eerily quiet forest. I watched, terrified, as the creature grasped its hands around the entirety of its victim's body. With an almost effortless pull, it tore the leg off of the victim and began eating it with the rest of the body falling to the ground. I don't know how much time passed as I watched this thing dine on its meal. I couldn't move. I shouldn't move. I made the decision to just lay in wait and hope the creature finishes its midnight snack and moves on. It wasted none of its meal, as I could see it tearing every piece of meat and flesh from the bones with its jagged, sharp teeth. As I look up at the creature's face, its toothy mouth covered most of its head with small, shiny eyes just above a flat, almost skeletal nose. After making short work of its meal, all that lay left were a pile of bones. Through the moonlight, I could see the bones of its victims. It had devoured the smaller bones, leaving the larger ones intact. My childhood fears were realized as I watched it conduct what I could only call a ritual. It began picking up the bones, one by one, examining each one as if it were oddly studying them. After a long examination of each bone, it put the bones into the tree. I could not see where the gap in the tree was from my angle, but I knew. The bones were being collected into a hollowed-out tree, just like what I saw 10 years ago. A light breeze filled the air as I continued to stare in horror at this creature. Once the bones were secured in their hiding spot, it began to move back into the trees. I let out a quiet sigh of relief. It stopped. With its skeletal nose in the air, it began sniffing. My fear returned as it slowly turned its head to me. It knew. It knew I was there. I've never seen anything take off so quickly as this thing did towards me. I panicked as I shined my light directly at the creature. The light seemingly disoriented it, as it covered its eyes and flung past me. I began running down the trail as quickly as I could, desperately trying to grab my knife. "Damn it!" I yelled, as I tripped over a rock and began tumbling down the trail. I landed on my back as I came to a stop from my tumble. My adrenaline was too high to feel pain as I pulled out my knife, pointing it in the direction I had just fallen from. Silence. The night sky was eerily quiet. After panning my surroundings for a few seconds, I got myself up and ran. I don't know how I ran so far, but I had finally made it to our cabin. I slammed the door tight as I pressed my body against the door, locking the deadbolt. I quickly walked to my kitchen sink window that was facing the direction of where I had just come from. Nothing. The forest in front of me was quiet. Almost too quiet. My shoulders began to droop as my fear lessened. I had escaped this monster. I began walking back to the living room, still in shock from what just occurred. I stood in the middle of the room, staring at the fireplace that lit the room up in an orange hue. I lifted my head up from my empty gaze as I heard a cracking outside. My fear returned as I crouched my body, slowly walking towards the living room window. I peeked through the blinds. I shot back in fright, as all I could see was a furry body pressed up against the window and sliding across. It was here. I ran to the bedroom to get my wife. "Wake up! Wake up!" I yelled in fright. Her eyes shot wide open at the sudden startle. What the hell are you doing?" she yelled. "There's I don't know, a creature outside, and it tried to attack me. We have to get out of here now." I screamed as I ran to the door. She shot straight up and jumped out of bed. I ran to the kitchen to desperately look for the car key. I was stopped in my tracks by a low growl coming out from in front of me. I slowly looked up to the kitchen window. The entirety of the window was covered by the creature's face. It was just staring at me with those cold, black eyes. Its sharp, long teeth seemed longer than before as drool dripped from the points of them. We stared at each other for several seconds. My wife walked in and saw my motionless gaze. She turned to look at what I could possibly be staring at. She let out a blood-curdling scream at the sight in front of her. The creature roared in rage and disappeared from the window. Scratching could be heard from outside as the creature was looking for a way into the cabin. Roars of frustration could be heard paired with crashing sounds and more scratching. My wife and I held each other in fright. "We have to wait until it's in the back," I whispered. "Once we hear it back there, we need to quietly go out the front door and get to the car." She nodded with eyes wide open. We listened for several more minutes as the creature shuffled around the cabin. Finally, it made it to the back door. My wife and I looked at each other and began quietly walking towards the front door. As I unlocked the deadbolt, a loud creaking was heard from behind us. The monster had bent the back door down almost in half. This time, I let out a scream and began frantically opening the door. I pushed my wife through as soon as it was open. She ran to the car. As I slammed the door shut, I saw through the small window in the door the creature made it through. It was tearing the cabin apart in rage, tossing furniture and digging its large claws into the walls. I ran to the car and jumped in the front seat. "Go, go, go!" My wife yelled from the passenger seat. I turned the ignition, starting the car. A loud crash was heard. The creature had barreled into the front door, taking out the entire door frame. It landed with a thud at the bottom of the entryway stairs, and flailed its long and bony limbs to regain balance. Without a word, I threw the car into drive and took off. I could see in my rearview mirror the creature giving chase. I hit the gas pedal hard as the engine wailed. I kept my eye in the mirror as the creature began to fade in the darkness behind us. It was gone. The trip back home was silent. Nothing was said until we got home. We tried desperately to put together what had just happened. She looked at me in shock as I told her about the tree and what the creature had done with its victim's remains. I've thought about going to the authorities with what happened, but me, finding 2 trees full of human bones? I don't think they would buy that. More so, my story of the large creature that filled those trees, even more unbelievable. We lost the money from the deposit on the cabin due to the damages, and we're being sued for the rest of the amount. Like I give a shit. I'm just happy to be alive, that we are alive after what occurred. I've not heard even a single other report of a creature like this, or even similar to what I encountered. I wonder, were we the lucky ones and the only ones to ever escape this thing? I will never go hiking again. I warn you, if you do, and you come across a black, dark, dead-looking tree, leave immediately. I wish I had never found that tree full of bones. Kevin Allen stepped inside the place of what used to be his former home. The paint chipped off the rotten wood. Each step he made caused the wooden floors to creak and moan. He went through each and every room, which would cause his mind to send him in the past, reliving old times of childhood. The living room, where on his first Christmas he was introduced to his best friend, Skip, a Jack Russell Terrier. In the kitchen, he pressed a hand against the corner, where he was sent to for eating an entire tub of ice cream. He stood over the stove, the ancient smells of his mother's cooking still hung in the air. He turned to the kitchen window that showed him the backyard. The memory of being outside playing with Skip and having a huge barbecue with his family appeared before him. Then a flash of the day he buried his best friend under the large oak tree, a tree that is now just a stump. For you see, this house is now abandoned. After the incident that caused Kevin to be sent into foster care, only 4 more families came to live in this house. But like Kevin, the families all reported strange events that transpired in the house. One family recounted how their pet dog had disappeared one night. Another told of how a father vanished with his newborn baby daughter. His wife had to be held for 3 months in a hospital for shouting nonsense. The third family had lost their eldest son when he had disappeared over the night inside the house. And the last family just all disappeared. Yet Kevin knew why those events happened. He knew why the people disappeared. He knew the truth in the words of that mother now shoved away from the world. He knew of the whereabouts of the missing, for you see, Kevin had witnessed it many nights ago. The seemingly strange but curious entity that has always lived in this house. The wooden stairs leading up to the second-story bend and moan under Kevin's feet. He grasped the chipped, worn-down railing of the staircase. His eyes focused on the first room he saw upon rounding up the last step of the stairs. One of the only 4 rooms that made up the second story. Kevin paused in front of its door. He pressed a hand against the door. He could feel the wood bend inward. He He took a glance around to look at the other rooms. One was his mother's bedroom, the other a simple bathroom, and the last room was an extra bedroom. However, he didn't come for those rooms. No, he came for this one. A room that he would never forget. His bedroom. He moved his hand down to the knob, slowly twisting it. At the sound of a small click, he slowly pushed open the door, only allowing it to stop halfway. Kevin cautiously poked his head inside. The room, much like of the house, was in despair, yet caused his mind to flutter with memories. Kevin pushed open the door all the way. He stood in the doorframe, scanning around. The room was empty save for a small milk crate that sat in the corner of the room. Kevin took one step into the room, making sure to not make any noise if need be, but the floor of his old room didn't comply. He made his way to the old dusty milk crate, carrying it over to the center of the room. He sat its solid end upward and gently sat himself down on it. With arms crossed, Kevin fixed his focus onto the single reason for his return to his former home. The only place in this house that caused all those who lived here to disappear. To many, it was just a simple storage space, and it always gave children their first steps into the unknown and fear. That place that is commonly called the closet. Kevin's eyes fixed on the closet full of anger and hatred. This one closet was the source of Kevin's tragic past, and the source of all those strange disappearances. For Kevin knew what lied in the closet. Just staring at the closet door brought back the horrifying sounds the thing made that night it appeared. It replayed every waking moment Kevin had, and in his dreams for the sight and sounds would never cease in his mind. Though he was only 6 years old at the time, he still felt himself responsible for what happened to his mother. He hated running away as his mother screamed out in pain from being consumed alive. He hated that he did nothing but mumble nonsense at his neighbors. He hated that when he and the neighbor's husband returned to the house, the only remaining signs of his mother were her carved out scratches on his bedroom floor with small droplets of blood. After that night, Kevin was eventually adopted by a loving family. He remembered the first night in his new home, watching his new closet door, fearing that thing followed him. Yet as the nights passed and Kevin grew older, his new closet never caused him any harm, or to anyone for that matter. Then after graduating high school and attending his first semester of college, Kevin saw the article about his former home. That is why Kevin is here now. Why he took the 10-hour drive back to his hometown to his former home. He wished to see that thing again. For though he feared it in a strange way, it fascinated him. For why did it only show up that night? Why didn't it appear before him when he was younger? Had it been asleep that long? Did the rolling thunder of that night awaken it? All these thoughts flooded his mind. Kevin wanted to know. He had to know. He needed to face it. Kevin rose up like a bullet from the crate. He took an inch forward, freezing for a moment. The fear of that night hit him as he made that first step. He, however, pushed himself forward. The drive to know pierced through his fear, allowing him to take step after step until his hand grasped the closet door. With a slight twist of the knob, he swung open the door. The darkness of the closet, that one first fear of children, stared at him. Kevin searched through the darkness for a light switch. As he did, something in that darkness was also searching, and it grasped Kevin's hand. It slithered around and up Kevin's hand to his forearm, squeezing hard. Kevin let out a deep scream of terror. A deep, low growl came from the darkness. Kevin pulled and pulled, trying as he might to free his arm. The thing inside of the closet did not waver. Kevin, thinking quickly, used his free hand to reach for his phone. He fumbled with it as he searched for the flashlight application on it. The thing inside the closet began to pull Kevin into the darkness. Kevin's face was so close that he could smell the years of flesh and blood the thing had ate. Kevin clicked on the application, and a bright light emerged from his phone. Kevin aimed the light, the first savior of all children, into the darkness, causing the thing to let out the most horrific yell ever. Kevin pulled out his arm, dragging the thing out from the darkness. He threw it against the back wall of the room. Kevin aimed the light at this thing. The grasp from this thing had nearly broken his arm, but it didn't stop Kevin. He fought through the sharp, numbing pain, keeping his sights on this thing. The thing, that which had caused Kevin childhood problems and the missing disappearances, was just a thing you would normally see in a closet, for what laid on the decrepit floor was not some strange tentacle beast, but a light, gray jacket. Kevin stared intensely at the thing in its hidden form. He pulled out a pocket knife from his back pocket, holding the blade. his hand shaking, but he managed to hold it firmly. Kevin took small baby steps toward the thing, fearing that it could jump at him at any moment. The tip of his shoes, barely inches away from the thing, Kevin knelt down. He held the tip of the knife over the thing. The thing in its jacket camouflage did nothing as the tip of sharp steel hung over it. Kevin placed his phone by his feet, with its light beaming down on the thing. Kevin placed his other hand on his hand, with the knife, allowing him to hold a better grip. As he knelt there staring at the thing, the tip of his shoe brushed against his phone, knocking it on its side. With the light not fully on anymore, Kevin watched as the thing morphed from its jacket into a slithering beast. Before it could strike, Kevin let out a loud scream. The house soon filled with the echoes of Kevin screaming and a horrifying deep growling. Kevin slashed and cut into the thing's slimy body. Its tentacles whipped around, smacking Kevin in his face and chest. Yet with each cut Kevin made, the thing started to defend itself using its tentacles to not attack, but cover itself. Kevin pounced on the thing, digging his knife into it. The minutes Kevin spent stabbing this thing felt like the longest in his life. After all was done, Kevin dropped his flesh and blood-ridden knife onto the floor. He fell back, sitting with his legs stretched out. He was covered in a thick, greenish-black liquid, presumably the thing's blood. The thing, on the other hand, lay sprawled out, cut into many pieces. Its tentacles wiggled out in search for its former body. Kevin wiped the thing's blood off his face. He found his phone and aimed the light into the thing. As he did, the thing stopped, revealing just a torn-apart jacket. The two arms were ripped at the seams with huge holes in them. The body of the jacket was ripped and torn with pieces of thread sticking out. Kevin pointed his phone light at his feet. When he did, the thing reappeared, still moving in pain of its mutilation. After all this time, he did it. Kevin had gotten his revenge on this thing. Yet, this wasn't just for him, but for all the families who had lived in this house. Kevin wiped away the gruesome details off his knife and put it back into his pocket. He watched the thing struggle to find its torn parts. Kevin smiled slightly at seeing the thing try, ever so helpless, to put itself back together. He walked back over to the crate he had used. He held the crate over the thing's body, pausing for a slight second, at the sight of seeing the thing's arm begin to connect with its main body. With haste in its arms, he slammed the crate right on top of the thing. The crack of the thing's body, followed by a loud sloshing, gave Kevin a satisfying feeling. He stared down at the large amount of blood that puddled under the crate. Finally, his regret of leaving that night had been amendment. The lives of those lost in this house could finally be put at peace. Kevin felt a strange set of muscle movements come over him. He feared the worst until he realized it was just a simple smile. He began to walk out of the room, only to pause at the door frame. Looking over his shoulder, he stared at the open closet door. Though the thing was dead on instinct, he rushed over, closing it. Walking out of his former home feeling accomplished for what he had done, Kevin never noticed one small detail that happened during his scuffle with the strange creature. Pieces of its thread managed to survive, forming a newly formed body. Kevin left his childhood home, unaware of his new jacket.
Alien abductees, or those who claim to have seen a UFO or alien phenomena, what is your story? Never thought I'd be someone to have a missing time story, but it happened. December 29, 2001, we left my house at 6 p.m. We rode our bikes to the woods down the block and hung out there for a bit. My friend was crushing the ice lake with a fence pole we found, and suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. I got up and ran to my friends, and the lake was frozen back over. We checked the time. It was 8:15. We then saw the most amazing shooting star, horizon to horizon above us. We even heard it. We hid in the woods and saw a star slowly move across the sky. Normally, I would say it's a satellite, but it moved a few inches in the sky and then stopped. There's no way over 2 hours went by. The woods are just a few blocks away. Mine happened in the early 2000s. I was around 16. Me, my brother, my friend, and friend's father were catfishing on Lake Okeechobee in Florida. The father had a large pontoon houseboat, so we stayed out there all night. Anyways, the father had went to bed, and at about 2 a.m. I decided I was going to bed. I laid down for about 5 minutes when my brother and friend came into the cabin and told me to wake up. I wasn't asleep yet, so I just got up. We walk out on deck and they both just point out west in the sky. There was this orangish/blue ball kinda floating but moving side to side a bit. We just stared at it for a few minutes. As we kept watching, it would change color. It changed from orange to bluish to greenish and back. There was no pattern. It also moved different directions. Finally, after a few minutes, it just zoomed and was gone. We weren't drinking or doing drugs, but we all saw it. Kind of freaked us out, but it was pretty cool. I have no idea what it was, but it was very strange. It wasn't a helicopter or plane, I do know that. Holy effing crap, I saw the same thing. Lake Okeechobee with my dad camping with some friends of his. I woke up at 2 a.m. and noticed everyone was looking up. We all saw the weird blue light too. It was around the same time period too. I'm not even joking, I've told so many of my friends of this experience. So crazy to see someone else seeing the same thing. Let me preface this by stating that almost all of the encounters that I have witnessed have been with at least one other individual. The first 2 encounters happened on 2 consecutive days in 1997, and the numerous other encounters happened over the span of 90 days a year and a half ago. I do not recall being abducted. I have filed reports with the incredibly incompetent MUFON. Back in 97, my buddy and I had just finished up our shift at a pizza joint. It was after 11 p.m. We were out and wanted to get stoned. We were completely sober. Anyway, we drove out into a cornfield in the off year, so it was full of rye. We were about a half mile off the road. It was pitch black, and because of our vantage point, I could see headlights in any direction for a good mile. We were way out in the country, so no worries. My buddy starts breaking up the weed when I notice what I believe to be truck headlights shine directly from behind, take a hard left, and disappear. My buddy didn't seem to notice, but I became frantic. I thought it was the cops. My friend thinks I am messing with him and continues breaking up some really terrible brickweed. I recall looking at the stars, and one star in particular grabbed my attention. I can't tell you why, but it looked like your average star. Within 30 seconds this star starts moving up and down, side to side, and in circles. I yelled in a panic, "What the hell is that?" My buddy gives a dismissive sigh, and then he looks where I am pointing. For 5 minutes the UFO continues to move in very fluid movements, making impossible maneuvers, and do so in complete silence. Without notice, this one object becomes 5 equally impressive star-like objects. They stayed close together. At times they moved in some kind of formation, and other times they seemed to move independently. Just as quick as the 5 came, they fused back together as one. We were in shock, but we didn't feel like we were in harm's way. We were recapping what we witnessed, but that single UFO was still there. It wasn't moving too much. We thought things were coming to a close, but we were wrong. This time the one object turned into at least 7 objects. The way they moved and jerked around felt aggressive to me. My friend must have felt the same way because he said he was starting to get nervous. I told him we should go. I embarrassingly confessed that I knew it was there for us, and I became fearful. We rush out of there and this thing follows us to the outskirt of town. I'm not sure if this counts as alien or not, but I definitely saw something I can't explain at all about 5 years ago, and have been dying to tell the story in a thread. About 5 years ago, me and 2 other friends were on our way back from Warped Tour in Maryland, being driven by one of the friends' mom, because none of us had a car we could drive yet. It was almost night, the sun was still kind of out and it wasn't that dark yet, and we were driving on a 2-lane highway that had trees on either side of the road, and a median in the middle of the lanes. Basically, some creature ran out from the trees on the other side of the highway, jumped the median and sprinted towards the trees on our side. We almost hit the thing and our friend's mom had to slam on the brakes, and everyone in the car was screaming our heads off, not because it was a look out for that deer situation, but because this was the scariest effing looking thing I've ever seen. It was black, had long gangly limbs and moppy black long stringy hair. This thing moved so effing weird I can see it clearly to this day. It galloped so awkwardly, did not run at all like a deer or anything of the sort. When it jumped off of the back 2 legs and landed again on the back 2 legs before coming down and galloping across the road. Everyone in the car said the same thing. Which was, what the hell was that thing? To this day I am convinced it was a demon or an alien or an escaped medical experiment. It was large and terrifying, And the way it moved was unlike anything I have ever seen in my life. I wish I had more details, but sadly that's all I remember. I've asked my friends and that friend's mom about it numerous times years after the fact, and it still gives everyone shivers. Before I tell my story, I'd like to say that I'm a complete skeptic and question anything and everything supernatural. I think extraordinary claims should always require extraordinary evidence. Even to this day, I will never be able to empirically prove what I experienced. I am currently 26 years old. This happened on June 16, 2007. I remember it vividly. It was immediately embedded into my long-term memory when it all happened. In psychology, I believe they refer to these events as a flashbulb memories. Anyways, I was living in my parents' home at the time. It was a pretty stormy night, the wind was gusting slightly more than usual, rain was coming down violently, your typical crackles of thunder/lightning. I was playing World of Warcraft at the time, enjoying the idea that I had a legitimate excuse not to go out and do anything. I was about to finish one of the longest chain quests in the game and boom, the internet goes out. I try for about 30 anxious minutes to get the internet to work, and you guessed it, nothing. I head to my room, frustrated. Here I am home alone, no internet and irritated as hell. My parents at the time were out at a work-related event. I remember laying on my bed just staring at the ceiling, turned my head to look at my old retro alarm clock, it read 6:18 p.m. Knock knock knock. I immediately sprung up, eyes wide open, startled as hell. I crawl to my window that faces the front door, and knock 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 again. I peek outside my window to see three tall men literally dressed in your typical FBI-looking black suits. One had what looked to be a folder/file or something, another had what I have now identified as a Geiger counter, the other one was beating my door with his huge fist. I head to the door not really thinking much of it, I honestly thought they were church people just soliciting their beliefs. I open the door. The one man nearest the door that was knocking greets me in a very monotone voice, pulls out a badge and says him and his colleagues need to check the water source from the house's faucets. I asked them a bunch of questions. It turns out that they were in fact the FBI and someone had allegedly tried to poison the city water. I called my parents to let them know what was going on, they okayed the situation. The guys in the suits didn't even check the water in my house, they had some other group of government guys show up and check. I tried to ask if there was a motive or if it was terrorist, whatever it might be. They simply said they couldn't talk about it in detail. Out of effing nowhere, all the lights in the house go out, it's pitch black, the guys in suits tell everyone to stay calm, they think it's just a power outage. The guys taking water samples turn on their flashlights. As one of the flashlights flashes over the tallest of the suited men, I see a reflection from his face, like there was metal under his face. The guy with the flashlight quickly directs the light somewhere else. A moment later the guy with the flashlight says, "Sir, it has begun." The suited guy with the Geiger counter turns it on. The thing just starts going haywire. Not even 3 seconds later, it felt as if I was being pulled into a million different directions. I could not see anything at first, just excruciating pain. I thought I was in the process of being disintegrated alive. Out of nowhere, I see nothing but white. I literally thought I was in what religious people call heaven. A man appears to me and smiles, swings his arm in an inviting/gesture way as if I were entering a ballroom dance or party. I try to walk but nothing, then white room gets sucked into itself and I see my life flash before my eyes. I see everything, Disneyland at 5, my first kiss at 15, watch 9/11 happen on TV with mom and dad, everything. I see Earth suspended in space, I am watching Earth from above. And I fall. I am falling, heart racing, numbness, disbelief. I see the ground getting closer and closer, I know this is it and I know I will die. Before I hit the ground I hear the monotoned voice of the suited man say in my head, "Do not," static and white noise, "no matter what." I woke up in my bed with a cold sweat and a panic, I freaked the hell out and ran downstairs to find my parents cooking dinner. I run back upstairs and see the time is 6:22 p.m. I was relieved to find out it was a dream. But, it gets creepy. I go back downstairs and ask my parents when they got home. They told me they'd been home as it was their day off. I asked how their company event went, and they said it was last week. I asked them what time I feel asleep. They told me, they didn't know I was sleeping. I go to my computer and find that my World of Warcraft account was logged in and where I left off before the internet went down. I check my computer for the date, And it was the 23rd. I have literally no memory of a full week. I try to recall what had happened in my dream, it was a blur. I go back upstairs and see that it looked like someone went through my closet. I search around and freak the F out. The exact same Geiger counter the alleged FBI agent was holding was in my closet. I have never told anyone about this till now. I still have the Geiger counter and don't know what to do with it. I can post a pic of it if someone wants, but I don't really want it for my own protection. I will though, as I know this sounds crazy. I've since spent the last decade trying to put the pieces together. I just live day by day as an ordinary person, hoping they don't return. This is the craziest UFO phenomena true story, and it came from my dad. 1960s in Ethiopia. My dad is just a child, 9 years old, at the time playing with his best friend Gabriel after school. They were playing in the fenced backyard of my dad's house. My dad turns his back for a second, then turns to look back at his friend, and Gabriel is gone. It's important to note that my dad and Gabriel were from the top 1% of Ethiopia's ruling elite. My dad's father was Minister of Interior of Ethiopia and Gabriel's father was a 4-star general of Ethiopia. The backyard Gabriel disappeared from had 10-foot bricked walls with armed guards patrolling on the outside. A couple of hours pass, his parents, my dad's parents, and guards are searching, but no Gabriel. 48 hours pass, now there is a nationwide search for this important general's kid, it's on the news, police are searching door to door describing him and what he was wearing when he disappeared. He was wearing his private school uniform, white shirt, brown pants. Helicopters even searched the countryside looking for him, still nothing. A month passes, then 2, then 4, people start losing hope that he would ever be found and think the worst. Exactly 6 months to the day he disappeared, Gabriel appears back in my dad's backyard. He was wearing the same white shirt private school uniform, and it was still clean, he looked exactly the same as when he disappeared. This is where it starts to get weird. Once they confirmed he was okay, they started asking where he had been. He said couple of nice men took him on a trip, he was in a white room that glowed and other children were there from different countries. He said he was surprised that the nice men who looked like white guys could speak Ethiopian, and he could understand what the other children were saying even though they were not Ethiopian. The white glowing room had no windows and the doors disappeared into the walls, there were buttons on the walls, and if a kid pushed them a bed would come out of the wall. He said he was then all of a sudden in a city that was glowing, clean, and cars were flying around him. He said there were people there but they looked strange, like us but different. One nice man was still with him and took him to a tall building, where he said he had to stay there for a while, but showed him a room that he could use for entertainment. Gabriel said he could push a button and the room itself goes places, an open field, the beach, the room itself even flies. He said after a couple of hours he was taken back to Ethiopia and appeared in the backyard. He thought he was only gone a couple hours total. No one believed him, and Ethiopia being a super religious country, most adults around him thought he got possessed by the devil. Gabriel even was forced to see a priest to get the evil spirits out of him. My dad still kept in contact with him throughout their lives. Gabriel got a doctorate in physics and I believe works Holland still. This event occurred in 2011 and has haunted me every day since. I work in networking and all of hours are late. I usually get off around 2 a.m. and then I am up for a few hours before I go to bed. This evening I got off work and it was raining really bad on my way home. When I got home, by chance, the clouds broke and I stepped outside to have a quick smoke. One of my buddies called me and we were chatting about work. It was still not raining and there were low-lying clouds. There are orange street lights in Allen, and they were reflecting off the bottom of the clouds creating an artificial light. There was a pretty good breeze whipping around, but no rain. I was facing the west and I looked to my right, and I see a black cube moving out of the north and traveling south at about 60 to 80 miles per hour. It was moving with a corner forward. This thing was huge. I was astonished to the core of my soul. I sat speechless for a few seconds knowing that I was seeing something amazing. It was 80 to 100 feet tall. It was a black cube in shape and looked like a rough stone surface. On the side of the cube was a border and within the border was a circular symbol, if that's what it even was. It looked like if you were to draw a circular maze. It was disturbing the air behind it and created a vaporous trail spinning behind it, and then disappearing. There was absolutely no sound. None. If you know Dallas, it was traveling in the direction of southbound 75 Central Expressway towards downtown. I told my buddy what I had seen, and he lives a few miles south. I fumbled over my words telling him and asked him to go outside to see if he could see it. He went out to the middle of his street and looked in the direction that it was coming from. After about 5 minutes it started to rain again. He stood out in the rain for another 15 minutes but never saw it. Good friend lol. Anyways, no one can ever tell me that I didn't see what I saw that night. I have been ridiculed and laughed at, but I know what I saw. It is almost a relief at this point to know that they are really here. I have been a long time lurker and I had to get this off of my chest. I have been searching Black Cube UFO for years now, every single day. I cannot stop thinking about it. Last Halloween me and my friends were on a dock about to light off some fireworks. We had all just arrived and were still just shooting the crap to see if anyone else would show up. Myself and my buddy were looking up at the stars when right above a hill behind our town we seen a light and it looked really odd. It was sort of bluish gray in color, but what was interesting was it had a metallic rainbow colored halo around it in the shape of a magnetic field, like how you see the magnetic field of the Earth. It was just hovering there at first, but then it slowly moved in a sort of wavy motion from east to west, and then when it got to the edge of the hill it hovered for a minute longer and then shot straight up into the sky. It wasn't very high in the sky, maybe 1,000 to 2,000 feet in the air. I will never forget the color of that magnetic rainbow force field looking thing. I was driving east down a highway in central PA, it was 1996-97. It was around 11:30 so not much traffic. I noticed something off to my left in the sky. There were 5 orange balls of light flying in a sort of diamond formation at maybe 5,000 feet, this is my best guess. It looked so weird I pulled over. They didn't appear to be going real fast but you could tell they were moving. Suddenly, they broke formation and started to zigzag all over the sky. After about 10 seconds of this they shot straight up in the sky, and were gone in an instant. Dumbfounded, I looked around for a minute and saw a guy standing across the road next to his car looking up at the sky. I called out to him saying, "Did you see that? What do you think?" He said, "Probably thinking the same as you," I said. "Well, that was cool," he said, and got into his car and left. Not sure what it was but I know I wasn't the only one who saw it that night. 1994, late August, twilight. I and 4 friends were up in Westwood Hills, a public park on the west side of the Napa Valley, above the town of Napa, California. We were all sober, looking east out over the valley. The sun had just set. A huge bright green fireball, approximately 20 to 30 miles away to the east, came down on a sloping trajectory at about 30 degrees, passing behind the east hills on the other side of the valley before it landed. It looked like it was at least as big as a football field. It was not moving fast like a meteor or shooting star, rather at about the speed of a prop plane. It definitely appeared to be on fire. There was no sound when it landed that we could hear, but there was a visible green flash that we could see against the mountainsides. From what we could tell, it landed a bit northwest of the town of Fairfield, California. We all saw it and were all amazed at the color and size, and that it had been moving so slowly. We watched it for about 2 minutes before it landed. Nothing more happened. Nothing was reported in the papers that we could find, and after talking about it for the rest of the summer, we pretty much went on about our lives. Then, I happened across this news story about 10 years later. Crop circles started appearing in Fairfield. I've never seen a UFO, but I've experienced what most people call grays. For the entirety of my 34 years. They, or perhaps a small group of them, have been interested in me for reasons beyond my comprehension. I can't say for certain if what I've experienced is real, but the fact that the fear is so strong makes it very hard to ignore. They show up. They look. And they look so deep into you. The fear and helplessness is like nothing you will ever experience in waking life. The very life within you shrinks and shakes and they keep looking. Sometimes inches from your face. It is pure fear. And when you wake it is like you have been born again. Sure. It could be night terrors. But night terrors don't leave doors open, TVs on, and your pets terrified under furniture. I have one. I don't know where I stand on the whole ET UFO controversy, but I can vividly recall an experience from my childhood that I've never forgotten and can't explain. I was maybe 10 or 11 years old. I distinctly remember it because it caused in me a sense of terror more pure than any I had or have felt since. My parents' house is out in the country and my old bedroom is on the second floor, with 2 windows facing north and west respectively. My bed was up against the west wall just beneath the window. My dog Henry was sleeping with me that night. I woke up to the sound of Henry barking and found my room bathed in light from the window above my bed. I can vividly recall Henry silhouetted, staring into the light, barking her brains out. I jerked up and looked out, but there was only light. A crackly, humming, droning sound filled the air. I was disoriented and terrified both for myself and for my dog, but all I could do was pull my blankets over my head and curl into a ball. I was sure Henry was going to die. I remember feeling sorry that I was too frightened to help. In my head the clear thought, "I don't want to die," repeated over and over, and I was aware that it was the first time in my life that I had ever really not wanted to die, like it was the first time I'd ever genuinely felt that I was going to die. The experience ends there. I woke up the next morning with Henry in my bed. I immediately went to my parents' room and woke them up to ask if they'd seen the light or heard Henry barking, but they hadn't. I wondered if I'd dreamt it, but I'd never had a dream so visceral before. All the fear I'd experienced up till that point became a lower classification. Now there was fear, and there was real fear. When I first heard about sleep paralysis, my mind immediately went to that night. It had some of the same characteristics, the terror, the vividness, the weird noise, but I wasn't paralyzed. I moved twice, once when I sat up and peeked into the light, and again when I pulled my blankets over my head and hid. Probably no one cares, but hey. I've got a relatively tame missing journey one. One night about 10 years ago, me and a friend were hanging out with another friend who lived in a nearby village, hour plus walk. Because we knew the route was dangerous at night, we deliberately didn't have anything to drink, so we watched Rocky and ate junk food, and all the other things teenagers do when they aren't drinking and doing drugs, and left the house at 1 a.m. We walked and chatted, making our way home until we get to the awkward field we have to cross to get back to our town. About halfway, it's dark and muddy, so we stop talking as much and pay more attention to the floor. In no time at all we come to the other end of the field and are pretty much home, so we check the time. 1:25. We'd just done an hour walk in 25 minutes, I can't run that distance in 25 minutes. We'd both checked the time when we left our friend's house, and both checked it when we got off the field, and it was the middle of August, so it wasn't daylight savings. That's the closest I've got. We still occasionally mention it when we see each other. When I was around 7 years old, I was raised primarily at the time by my grandparents who lived in a rural county in East Texas. I'll never forget one day when we had a most unusual man come by the house one afternoon unexpectedly. I remember there being a knock at the door as I was playing in the living room at the time, and called up to announce to my grandparents someone was at the door. My grandmother took a quick peek out the front window before answering the door, and I remember glimpsing at a very dark-colored or black sedan, unsure of the type, parked outside. Thinking back, I find it odd at the time I couldn't recall hearing it pull up, as I had been playing near that window for some time. My grandmother answered the door, and to the best of my recollection the man revealed himself to be some sort of door-to-door salesman. My grandmother invited him in and called for my grandfather. I never in my life had seen a man so pale. He was dressed in essentially all black, or very dark blue, suit, with matching hat and initially large sunglasses, which initially made me wonder if he wasn't blind. They reminded me of that type, and one of the saddest excuses for toupee I've yet to bear witness to. I was totally transfixed on the man and couldn't get over the stark contrast of his pale skin to his seemingly drawn-on with lipstick this pinkish lips. My fixation became apparent, and my grandmother shooed me into a back room as to leave the men to talk, so to speak, uninterrupted. Throughout the visit I kept trying to sneak peeks at the man, and commented to my grandmother whether or not she thought he was sick, as he was so pale and thin. Eventually, I suppose he finished his pitch and eventually made his way quite slowly for an exit. I recall as he was leaving, he seemingly thanked both my grandparents. I couldn't make out everything that was said, but I recall he did something more odd than his appearance. He seemed to pass his hands in front of both of my grandparents' faces and said something to both, but all I could make out was the word forget, and soon was on his way. My grandparents seemed to be momentarily in a dull fog after closing the door, and quietly pulling off. Never saw him drive off. I immediately asked them who was that man, and they looked at each other and said, "What man?" Now, as you can understand, all three of us were quite baffled, them as having no recollection of a visitor, and me having no rational explanation as how in the hell they couldn't remember that fricking wackadoo looking salesman. I went on for weeks asking them who the man was, and trying to jog their memory, and as always they said there was no one. They even went as far as to say I was mixing up another business acquaintance of my grandfather, and had him drop by one day, but I assured them there was no way I could confuse the two, as the man in question was paler than Gollum in the Lord of the Rings trilogy and their friend was nothing of the sort. I had almost forgot about the incident entirely until watching a show on Sci-Fi related to a Men in Black theme and it came back to me. As recent as a year ago, I tried to bring it up again when I was home visiting and my grandfather didn't remember a thing, while my grandmother again didn't recall the strange man but vividly remembers me asking for weeks on end about a strange man neither of them ever remembered setting foot in the house. This happened back in the mid-80s and I'm in my early 30s now looking back, and a lot of the details aren't as crisp, but I know what I saw.